Last Thursday, Viet vet, former Hawk, Pennsylvania Congressman John Murtha shocked America with a heartfelt and bold statement which ends, quote, "Because we in Congress are charged with sending our sons and daughters into battle, it is our responsibility, our obligation to speak out for them. That's why I am speaking out. Our military has done everything that has been asked of them. The U.S. cannot accomplish anything further in Iraq militarily. It is time to bring them home." Now, unable to book Murtha himself for this show, my guest today will be 3 soldiers who fought in Iraq. And we'll talk about why they joined the military, how they felt about going to war, what they experienced returning home, and why they now oppose our continued military presence. We'll try to learn from them how and why their own vision changed and what they think other soldiers may be feeling and believing. But first, to set the context and to inform those who haven't had a chance to read the whole thing or see it or hear it, I'm actually going to read John Murtha's statement of November 17th. I think it is so good that it came from a 37-year Marine Corps veteran. He signed up for the Marines in 1952. He served in Vietnam from 66 to 67, in the reserves until 90, Bronze Star with a combat chevron in 1966, Purple Heart in 1966, Second Purple Heart in 66, Distinguished Service Medal of the U.S. Marine Corps in 1990, and he served in the House of Representatives from 69 to 74, in the Pennsylvania State House, and then the U.S. Congress from 74 to the present. He's the top Democrat on the defense panel. He voted for force in Iraq. He voted for the first Desert Storm. And when he speaks, people have to listen. And the reason I'm going to read the statement is that you'll see that whatever spin you might be getting in a short newspaper article or a right-wing attack, this was not what he said. These are Murtha's words, and then we're going to bring in 3 Iraq veterans. The war in Iraq is not going as advertised. It is a flawed policy wrapped in illusion. The American public is way ahead of us. The United States and coalition troops have done all they can in Iraq, but it is time for a change in direction. Our military is suffering. The future of our country is at risk. We cannot continue on the present course. It is evident that continued military action in Iraq is not in the best interest of the United States of America, the Iraqi people, or the Persian Gulf region. General Casey said in a September 2005 hearing, quote, "The perception of occupation in Iraq is a major driving force behind the insurgency," unquote. General Abizaid said on the same date, quote, "Reducing the size and visibility of the coalition forces in Iraq is a part of our counterinsurgency strategy. For 2.5 years, I have been concerned about the U.S. policy and the plan in Iraq. I have addressed my concerns with the administration and the Pentagon and have spoken out in public about my concerns. The main reason for going to war has been discredited. A few days before the start of the war, I was in Kuwait. The military drew a red line around Baghdad and said when U.S. forces cross that line, they will be attacked by the Iraqis with weapons of mass destruction. But the U.S. forces said they were prepared. They had well-trained forces with the appropriate protective gear." These are the words of John Murtha on November 17th in the U.S. Congress. "We spend more money on intelligence than all the countries in the world together and more on intelligence than most countries' GDP. But the intelligence concerning Iraq was wrong. It is not a world intelligence failure. It is a U.S. intelligence failure and the way that intelligence was misused. I have been visiting our wounded troops at Bethesda and Walter Reed hospitals almost every week since the beginning of the war. And what demoralizes them is going to war with not enough troops and equipment to make the transition to peace, the devastation caused by IEDs, being deployed to Iraq when their homes have been ravaged by hurricanes, being on their 2nd or 3rd deployment, and leaving their families behind without a network of support. The threat posed by terrorism is real, but we have other threats that cannot be ignored. We must be prepared to face all threats. The future of our military is at risk. Our military and their families are stretched thin. Many say the Army is broken. Some of our troops are on their 3rd deployment. Recruitment is down, even as our military has lowered its standards. Defense budgets are being cut. Personnel costs are skyrocketing, particularly in healthcare. Choices will have to be made. We cannot allow promises we have made to our military families in terms of service benefits, in terms of healthcare, to be negotiated away. Procurement programs that ensure our military dominance cannot be negotiated away. We must be prepared. The war in Iraq has caused huge shortfalls at our bases in the U.S. I'm going to skip this next paragraph, and then Our military has been fighting a war in Iraq for over 2.5 years. Our military has accomplished its mission and done its duty. Our military captured Saddam Hussein and captured or killed his closest associates. But the war continues to intensify. Deaths and injuries are growing. With over 2,079 confirmed American deaths, over 15,000 have been seriously injured, and it is estimated that over 50,000 will suffer from battle fatigue. There have been reports of at least 30,000 Iraqi civilian deaths. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. I said over a year ago, and now the military and the administration agree, Iraq cannot be won militarily. I said 2 years ago the key to progress in Iraq is to Iraqicize, internationalize, and energize. I believe the same today, but I have concluded that the presence of U.S. troops in Iraq is impeding this progress. Our troops have become the primary target of the insurgency. They are united against U.S. forces, and we have become a catalyst for violence. U.S. troops are the common enemy of the Sunnis, Saddamists, and foreign jihadists. I believe with a U.S. troop redeployment, the Iraqi security forces will be incentivized to take control. A poll recently conducted shows that 80% of Iraqis are strongly opposed to the presence of coalition troops, and about 45% of the Iraqi population believe attacks against American troops are justified. I believe we need to turn Iraq over to the Iraqis. I believe before the Iraqi election scheduled for mid-December, a month from now, the Iraqi people and the emerging government must be put on notice that the United States will immediately redeploy. All of Iraq must know that Iraq is free from United States occupation. I believe this will send a signal to the Sunnis to join the political process for the good of a free Iraq. My plan calls to immediately redeploy U.S. troops consistent with the safety of U.S. forces, to create a quick reaction force in the region, to create an over-the-horizon presence of Marines, and to diplomatically pursue security and stability in Iraq. This war needs to be personalized. As I said before, I have visited with the severely wounded of this war. They are suffering. Because we in Congress are charged with sending our sons and daughters into battle, it is our responsibility, our obligation to speak out for them. That's why I am speaking out. Our military has done everything that has been asked of them. The U.S. cannot accomplish anything further in Iraq militarily. It is time to bring them home. And I was just reading the statement of Congressman John Murtha of Pennsylvania, the 37-year Marine, when he made what I thought was as clear and consistent a statement of why to bring U.S. forces home when he says that he believes and the Iraqi people believe that the occupation is the target now. Now I'm going to bring in three veterans of the Iraq War. And first will be Sean Hughes, who is in the studio with me. He's a former Marine and also a playwright of a play called The Sandstorm, which is played in L.A. and in D.C. and so on. Sean Hughes.
Thanks for having me.
Let me start with you, and then I'll bring in Paul Rieckhoff and Jimmy Massey in one after another. But first, I'm going to ask you a couple of setup questions. Why did you enlist? When did you enlist? Briefly, your experience in Iraq and your response since your return.
I enlisted in the United States Marine Corps in response to the September 11th attacks in 2001. The following day, the day after, I went to the Marine Corps recruiting office at Sunset in La Brea and told them I wanted to enlist and I wanted to be in the infantry field. Over the next couple of weeks, my recruiter guided me along that process, and October 30th, I showed up at MCRD San Diego and started basic training. And
when did you get to Iraq?
I deployed with 2nd Light Armor Reconnaissance Battalion. We left for Kuwait in February of 2003, and we were part of the initial invasion in March.
How long were you in the fighting in Iraq?
We were there. My unit we were actually augmenting 1st Marine Division, and shortly after President Bush appeared on the aircraft carrier declaring mission accomplished, they started to reduce troop levels in Iraq. There was a little bit of a lull between the fall of the Ba'athist and Saddam and the I guess kind of rise of the insurgency, and they started cutting back troops. And my unit was one of the units that they sent back early. And then shortly we came back right at the end of May, and shortly thereafter is when the insurgency kind of sprung up, and they were freezing the people that were there. I know 3rd Infantry Division in the Army got extended several times. And so in a way, I guess, Me personally, I got lucky that my unit got sent back when it did, and but unfortunately, it just shows the gross miscalculations of this administration and their policy when they're reducing troop levels when in fact we did not have enough troops on the ground there to deal with Iraq after their infrastructure was destroyed.
And briefly, your experience and how you came home. In other words, you enlisted September 12th, day after the attack on New York. You were obviously gung-ho to answer back that attack. When you went over to Iraq, were you eager? Did you believe that was part of the response to September 11th at that point?
I don't know that I actually believe that it was part of the response to September 11th. I did believe that Iraq was a credible threat. Polls at the time show that about 90% of Americans believed that Iraq possessed weapons of mass destruction, believed that Iraq was, posed a threat not only to its neighbors but possibly to us. I was part of that 90%. I'm also, I like to say I'm part of the 10% of that 90% that'll admit it now. It was afterwards. I mean, it all comes down to weapons of mass destruction for me. And when they weren't there, I don't care. Dick Cheney's been going around accusing all of us of being revisionist right now. But if you're trying to say that the war in Iraq was about anything other than WMD, then that's revisionism. And and I remember that. I don't care how many times Karl Rove, Dick Cheney, George Bush, Donald Rumsfeld, whoever says that this war was about anything other than WMD or that we were given a justification or rationale other than WMD. I refuse. I mean, I've got a long memory, and it was only a couple years ago. I know why I was sent to Iraq. I know why I went to war. And when that proved to be false, that's when all the questions started. And I think that that's when we lost our credibility and our world standing. And ultimately, we're in a quagmire right now.
President Jimmy Carter, just before the invasion of Iraq, said something which I had said on the air, which was, if the threat is WMD, and if the goal is accommodation to UN commands, then let's just do permanent inspections. Let's keep people crawling around Saddam's bunkers, castles, around that country. And as long as we've got inspectors on the ground, it's pretty unlikely anything's going to happen. That, of course, was not considered an option by this administration. Briefly, before I bring in Paul and Jimmy, the play I mentioned, Sandstorm, how did that happen?
Sandstorm was just born out of a lot of personal pain. I wasn't, it was difficult for me as you start to decompress when you're in a war zone, from my experience in a war zone and from talking to other veterans, you kind of go numb. I mean, everything that makes you a functional and healthy individual amongst society are all detriments in a combat zone. And it takes a while to decompress from that. And as I started to, and dealing with some of the images and that we see, I mean, this war was fought in an urban environment. It's not like, two armies who, went out there on a battlefield. I mean, it's fought amongst the civilian population, and ultimately it is that civilian population that has paid the heaviest toll. And, it's difficult as a husband, as a father, to kind of reconcile who I was over there with some of the things that I saw. I mean, a dead child on the side of the road in Nasiriyah, about the same age as my son right now, and how unfeeling I was at the time about it with who I am now, how I feel about it now. And I think and able to write a play and put these feelings onto characters, it was a safe way for me to start the road home, and start that process. It's been well received, and I'm really grateful for that.
Now let me bring in Paul Rieckhoff. Paul enlisted in the U.S. Army Reserves in 98. In 2003, he went over to Iraq. Paul Rieckhoff, welcome.
Thank you very much, sir. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Okay, I believe you and Jimmy both heard me speaking with Sean. I'm going to ask you as the first question, basically the same question that I asked Sean, and then Jimmy, I'll bring you in and do the same. Why did you enlist? When did you go over? How did you feel at the point at which you went over? What was your experience? What have you done since your return?
Well, I enlisted in '98 because I wanted to serve. My father had been drafted during Vietnam, and my grandfather spent a few years in the South Pacific during World War II. And they weren't exactly thrilled about their experiences, but they definitely grew as people and instilled in me a sense of honor and I guess a need to serve my country. And when I graduated from college, it was definitely an unusual path. This was before 9/11, and I felt that because I didn't have to serve didn't mean that I shouldn't serve.
And by the way, let me just say, you graduated from, I think, from a fairly elite college, yes?
Yeah, I went to Amherst College.
Yeah, so it wasn't like the guy next to you was following you down to the to the recruitment center.
No, I remember having a conversation with the president of the college, and he just couldn't comprehend why I would ever consider joining the military. All my colleagues and friends were going to Wall Street or law school or consulting, and it was a very unusual path at that time, but it was something I really wanted to do, and I didn't feel like I could get the leadership abilities and the skills that I could get in the military anywhere else. So that really kind of fueled my passion to join the military, and there was also a sense of adventure. I think ultimately it came down to either joining the Peace Corps or joining the military, and to be honest with you, in the military you got to ride around on tanks and blow stuff up and jump out of buildings and jump out of helicopters, and it excited me. So I was in.
And you went over when?
I went over with the initial invasion at the same time Sean did pretty much. He came up with the Marines, and I came in with the 3rd Infantry Division, and we ended up in central Baghdad, finally settling in at the end of April, and was there till the spring of the following year, almost a year in total. So we were there for the invasion, and then the initial looting and the chaos that followed the disbanding of the Iraqi military, and then we were really there also for the birth and emergence of the insurgency as it pretty much came to a crescendo as we left in the spring of 2004.
And as I read in your bio, yours was the first reserve unit awarded the Combat Infantry Badge since the Korean War. The point there being that there had been no reserve units awarded that since then, correct?
Right. I mean, as we now know, it's a pretty unprecedented level of involvement for the National Guard and Reserve. But during the initial invasion, the first couple 100,000 who went across the border, it was a pretty small percentage of the overall force structure, probably something like 10 or 15%. Now we're looking at close to 50% of our overall force structure in National Guard and Reserve. And when I came home after the first year of the war, most of my friends and colleagues in the National Guard didn't think they were going to go. It still looked bad, but we never thought that, a few years later that, over 80% of the National Guard and Reserve would be deployed throughout the theater of Iraq. So at that point, our Guard unit hadn't been actively in combat since Korea, and neither had any other unit in the National Guard. So it was really something new.
And you're one of the founders of Operation Truth upon your return. How did that happen?
Well, I think like Sean and Jimmy, I came home and was pissed off, and I was dissatisfied with the dialogue. When I came home in the spring of 2004, John Kerry and George Bush were throwing the Iraq War back and forth like a political football, and to be honest with you, nobody really knew what the heck they were talking about. And the news media was dominated by Martha Stewart and what color pajamas Michael Jackson was wearing, and the country didn't really seem connected with the war. So it was about time to inject the people who had been on the ground in the discussion, so we formed Operation Truth last summer and have been focused on primarily trying to connect people with the war and giving them the way to get involved. And our website, OperationTruth.com, has been a real hub for veterans to connect and also for people to find out more about what's happening in the veterans movement and also on the ground in Iraq through videos, blogs, diary entries. And at this point, we've got guys in all 50 states, Puerto Rico and Guam, and we're regularly appearing in the media and really pushing back on both sides of the House here, Republicans and Democrats, and trying to demand accountability and chart the best and most responsible course of action for our future in Iraq and beyond.
And by beyond, we mean both beyond for the military as it might be engaged in combat, but also for the veterans as they might try to cope with life.
Absolutely. Well, there's two pieces. And the first is that, I don't care what George Bush tells you, our military has been run into the ground. More than half of our folks are there for a second time. The divorce rates have doubled. We're moving combat units out of Korea and out of training units in the United States to now perform combat missions in Iraq. Recruiting numbers are in the toilet. Retention numbers will soon fall. And at the end of the day, he's really destroyed our military. And that will have long-term effects for our national security for decades.
Yeah. Very much what you heard me read Murtha's statement. Murtha says exactly the same thing.
Yeah, he's right on the money. And Representative Murtha has been heavily involved in everything from body armor shortages to Humvee armor. And we know that he's been a real friend to troops and veterans throughout this conflict, not just now. Most people haven't heard of him until now, but Murtha was one of the first guys out in front to be demanding more from the folks in the Department of Defense and Pentagon for our soldiers.
Give that website again for Operation Truth. And again, Operation Truth is not a political organization. It is an organization that's about exactly that. As the military pursues operations, this is an operation for the truth.
Well, yeah, that's right. I think they say that the truth is the first casualty of war, and that's definitely true now. And I won't say we're not political. I mean, I think Clausewitz once said that war is the extension of politics by other means. So there's definitely a political vein, but we're nonpartisan. We've got Republicans and Democrats and everything in between, and we're really trying to represent the next generation of the veterans movement. And it's long overdue that we finally start to have a conversation about this war, about how it started, about why we, the three of us in this conversation, became veterans. Veterans Day came up, and President Bush didn't talk much about veterans advocacy. He didn't talk about expanding the VA or mental health care. He talked about the rationale for war and continued to make his flawed case. So we've got to, not only talk about the war in Iraq, but talk about the ripple effects it'll have on our generation and beyond. Everything from post-traumatic stress disorder to the 15,000 or so that have been wounded. There's a tremendous human cost that's going to be felt for a long time.
And the website is OperationTruth.com.
Oh, yes, sorry, OperationTruth.com, OperationTruth.org. It all works.
Very good.
And you can also
and let me just share with all three of you. My dad, who was a bombardier in World War II, shot down, spent a year and a half in a POW camp, and worked his entire career for the VA. Jimmy Massey, former Staff Sergeant, United States Marines. You were an infantryman, an infantry instructor. You were one of those Marine instructors at Parris Island, South Carolina. You were a recruiter, and then you served. When did you enlist? Why did you enlist? What was your experience? What did you come home to do?
Right. I enlisted in 1992. I grew up working class, sometimes poor, and I went to college for a year after I graduated from high school. I ran out of money, and I took a job working in the oil fields in New Orleans, and that fell short. So I found myself basically homeless, living on the streets of New Orleans. And I was on my way to a job interview when I passed by a Marine recruiter that was pumping gas in his car, and he motioned me over, and I went and talked to him, and he bought me lunch. And by the end of the day, I was nodding north and south and ready to join the Marines. But the reason I joined, this was shortly after the first Gulf War, and I felt that at that point, we had kind of cured or healed the ghosts of Vietnam, and I was going in, for primarily tangible benefits. And so I went in and spent several years and enjoyed my time and career that I was in. The Marines taught me very valuable lessons, intangible traits, and that sort of thing. But I basically became indifferent to the military or the Marine Corps while I was on recruiting duty. I started to realize what I was doing was, in fact, economic conscripting young men and women into the military. And then I realized that I myself was an economic conscript. And I began to realize that, as far as us being a first world economic power, we fell short as far as having a free healthcare system for Americans and, a free education system since I had traveled abroad. So I went into Iraq with already indifferent feelings towards the military, but I did feel that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. I went into the Marine Corps during a time and period when the Cold War had just ended, and we were searching for a new enemy.
I think we've given people, three voices that they can relate to and make this experience a real one.